All right, welcome to part three, the pros and cons of international schools. Again, this is just my opinion, but I want to start off by saying that in international schools, in fact, in all of teaching, I've found good people, but many of my closest friends today are international teachers from all over the world. Lots of just really good people who are also quite adventuresome and like to do things. So that's my number one thing I've taken. Number two is the opportunity to save money. If you're in a case like mine where your spouse is transferred around the world and you've been lucky enough to get jobs, we can save up to 100% of my salary. And oftentimes it's been tax-free. So lots of potential savings. If you're a teaching couple, you'll oftentimes, depending on the contract you get, be able to save sometimes one person's salary, but oftentimes great vacations and be able to save a lot of one of the spouse's salaries. If you're single, you'll still be able to save money, maybe not as much, but you'll be able to save money just about wherever you go. In Europe, it can be really hard to save money. Some of the Asian communities, it can be pretty hard. In the Middle East, it seems to be a lot of teachers are able to save a lot of money. Another thing I really like about international schools is the diversity of students. As I mentioned before, the schools I've taught in have all been about 25% Americans, about 25% students from that country, and then 50% of the students from just about everywhere on Earth. And because of that, you have so many different cultures and so many new things. Kids are bringing in food all the time. They're wearing their national dress for certain days, like their national day, that you didn't even know existed. And then they come in and they tell you about it. You also get to know students super well. You know about their families. You go to events with them. You see them on the weekends. You play sports with them. You're just always around other students, and for that matter, teachers and parents, which I think for the most part has been super wonderful in education. Continuing on, I wrote down a couple other things. Being a teacher internationally gives you a lot more independence than I found in public schools in the United States. I'd ask my teacher, my principal, if I could do something, and generally speaking, they're like, yeah, do it. Try it out. I did a project-based learning activity that I asked my principal if I could do. He's like, yeah, that's no problem. Go ahead and try it, see if it works, and maybe, we'll learn from it. So that kind of thing is really nice in international schools. So I think I hit all of those. Now I'm going to move on to some of the cons, some of the things that maybe aren't as good in international schools as maybe I thought they would be. First thing I'll say is you have a huge variety of students, which isn't necessarily a con in itself, but you oftentimes won't have the support that you need. English as an additional language might be an issue. They may not hire enough people for that. Learning support is often an area that might be underfunded or under-resourced in a school. You have students that are coming from, sometimes 25% of the students change in a school each year. And so you have students coming from all over the place with all different types of academic backgrounds, and generally speaking, if they've gone to one international school, your school is probably going to accept them regardless of how they did at the last school. So that can be kind of strange. There's oftentimes a curriculum that the school follows, but if you're not following like IB or AP, teaching an AP class, you can oftentimes find that the curriculum may not be up to snuff. It may not be up to standard. You may not have the resources or from the last teacher that maybe you would have in a situation in the United States where you're using like the Virginia Standards of Learning to teach your content. Speaking of that, administrators in international schools, I put down don't have a backbone. They oftentimes kowtow to the parents or the students in situations where I find that, like, if they maybe just took a different stance, it would actually help the school out in the future, to maybe curb some of the problems that you have with some of the students. But it seems like it's a trend in all the schools I've worked in, that some of the administrators, and some of the administrators have been the best administrators I've ever had in my life, but in the area of discipline, they sometimes tend to lack the backbone, or to be able to stand up to parents. Speaking of parents, another thing is, a lot of the parents that you'll teach, you might teach the child of a president or a prime minister or somebody who is super famous. All of those things have happened in the schools that I've taught in, and so it's really hard to say no to a royal family member that you know can have you kicked out of the country or something like that if you don't do what they ask. So sometimes it's hard to deal with parents. Parents also oftentimes are not familiar with the Western education system, where we do things a little bit differently than you might do in a different system. So parents don't understand. They might go directly to the director of the school with an issue, when really in a U.S. school, they would be expected to talk to the teacher first. Finally, I want to talk about international schools generally don't have unions. Contract negotiations are usually just you and the administrator that's hiring you. And if you run into problems, you really don't have anybody to have your back. You might have other teachers or something like that, but in general, it's kind of you and the school clearly has more power. So as you're entering a contract, you really want to make sure that you want to sign it. I'm not saying it's a bad thing. I have never had an issue with any school I've taught in regarding contracts or salaries or benefits or anything like that. I think they've been wonderful, but I have heard stories of other people who have had problems with schools that didn't live up to the promises that they provided. So we'll talk more about that in the upcoming videos. All right, for this one, for homework, what I would like for you to do is I would like you to talk to some members of your family and just kind of put a little itch in their ear, maybe about that you might want to be thinking about maybe moving to a different country to teach internationally. Maybe just tell them about international schools or what they're about. Just get that in their ear, just so that they know and see how they react. Next video is going to talk more specifically about the schools and some of the background information about the day-to-day operations of schools. So I look forward to seeing you soon. Take care, and check out video number 4, The School.